Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I had a great day yesterday on the first ever masterclass that we ran, and I'll be posting the a link to the masterclass if you're looking to download it for a small stipend. The This is the first one we've done, and we're going to do several more. So the next one coming up is America, and that we'll be doing that later this month. I'll be making announcements about that later this week. Okay, so I want to talk about the kind of social and historical roots of the not just the fascist voter, but the fascist kind of participationist. Um, the brown shirt and the black shirt, and who it was broadly, the kinds of men broadly that fought for Hitler in the lean years of the 1920s and were part of Mussolini's black shirts, which achieved power a lot more quickly. And of course, this is relevant because when you understand who ICE are, socially and demographically, it paints a picture of what it is the Trump regime, and particularly Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem, who are, I think, far more instrumental behind all this, are trying to achieve. Um, there's a kind of an assumption that the brown shirts were simply Freikorps, demobbed soldiers with nothing to do, and it's a bit more complicated than that because the kind of like the fighters of the Nazi movement in the 1920s, who have periods of kind of expansion and contraction, um, are very often former soldiers, but not exclusively. And not all of the former soldiers, not all of the Freikorps, not all of the veterans of the trenches tacked towards fascism. There were militias, a variety of different militias, not all of which were the shock troops of the Nazis. Also, there was a generational cohort of young men who never saw the First World War. And this, to our ears, will seem strange and alien, but felt bitter and cheated that they didn't. Their view of the trenches, this kind of fantasy view of the trenches, which maps into and it kind of a whole part of the architecture of kind of fascist thought and belief, was that it was a kind of a noble fantasy, of nation and fatherland and masculinity and meaning and purpose. And there were lots of kind of bored and feckless young men in the early 1920s who not only grieved the defeat of Germany in the First World War and viewed it a betrayal and this kind of this idea of the Dolchstoß, the stab in the back, haunted them, but also they felt that they never got to not just participate or do their bit, but they never got to join in essentially the adventure of it all, the romance of it all, which if again it sounds absurd, it sounds ridiculous, but we are looking at it from 2026. We're looking at it from a century later and a century of understanding about the First World War. There were young men who understood implicitly about the First World War, could see the veterans around them, the widows, and the war graves, but still viewed this as the kind of the key moment in their lives that they missed. and the idea of heroic and noble sacrifice, which was key to Nazism, the fantasy of the sacrifice soldier, the fantasy of the, as Hitler put it, those 2 million heroes whose deaths had now been in vain. All of that kind of was a powerful intoxicant. And of course, the brown shirts are fueled by resentment. The idea that their status, the status of Germany, and also their status as men, and their status as members of former soldiers, um, had been diminished. The consequences of the Treaty of Versailles, the imposed peace, the diktat, as it was referred to, and the war guilt clause particularly, were hugely resented, and the kind of the seeds of a kind of a new and virulent kind of post-war toxic hyper-nationalism, this kind of revanchism, are there. And the way in which the explanation that the Nazis put forward is that in order to restore Germany's status, that society itself needs to be transformed. And the first stage of that was to challenge this weak centrist left government, the Weimar government that emerges, um, and to overthrow it. It is illegitimate. It is not the true expression of the will of the German people, and only somebody like Hitler it has the capacity to divine what that will is. Now, a lot of these guys probably weren't the most adherent readers of Mein Kampf. Some were, and some reached for ready explanations about the collapsing status, their collapsing status in Germany during the 1920s, which are the kind of the lean years, but particularly after 1929, when the numbers within the Nazi movement and the scope of the Nazi electorate explode, obviously because of the Great Depression. And the ones that are slightly more literate read Mein Kampf, and it presents to them a credible explanation as to why their status has collapsed. When you look at, I mean, a lot of them were guys that obviously enjoyed violence, and they're not doing it for the money. They're paid kind of a bit of beer money. It's not like ICE, where, as we shall see, the rates of pay are transformative. It would appear absolutely transformative for young men with few other prospects. The black shirts in Italy are they come from they're formed in slightly different circumstances. In Germany, by 1919, the Freikorps, in kind of cahoots with the Weimar government, have crushed the Rata Republic. They have crushed the Spartacists and a few other little pockets of a socialist revolution. So that the fear in Germany of the left is pretty minimal by 1920, 1921. However, in Italy, it's much more pronounced, much more credible, and much more scary for the Italian bourgeoisie. And there's a really fantastic book, if you ever get to read it, by Christopher Duggan, Fascist Voices, which is a kind of an oral history, or like almost like a people's history of the fascist movement in Italy. And one of the kind of the anecdotes of somebody who later goes on to join the Black Shirts movement. He's an army officer who returns from the front in the Alpines, in the Alpine front, and he gets off a train and finds Milan in revolt. He finds that there is no deference towards fighting men who've sacrificed, and the working classes there that he despises are going on strike. They have not been struggling in the national movement, in the national interest. Far from it. They have been demanding wage rises, while heroic, noble young men at the front have fought and struggled together in this kind of national endeavour.
AI is transforming customer service. It's real and it works. And with Fin, we've built the #1 AI agent for customer service. We're seeing lots of cases where it's solving up to 90% of real queries for real businesses. This includes the real-world complex stuff like issuing a refund or cancelling an order. And we also see it when Fin goes up against competitors. It's top of all the performance benchmarks, top of the G2 leaderboard, and if you're not happy, we'll refund you up to $1 million, which I think says it all. Check it out for yourself at fin.ai.
Try Angel Soft for your tushy. It's made by angels. Soft and strong, budget friendly. The choice is simple. Pick up a pack today.
Angel Soft.
Soft and strong, simple.
And of course, the reason why workers have been going on strike is because the country is racked with inflation, and living standards have collapsed. But the way in which the way in which in both Nazi Germany, well, Weimar Germany, and pre-fascist Italy, Bolshevism, or any iteration of left politics, from centre-left politics through to the unions, through to radical revolutionary socialist thought, is associated with treason. It's associated with subversion. It's associated with an attack on the national will, and it's associated with reasons in Germany for the downfall and defeat in the war, and in Italy for reasons for the kind of the mutilated peace, that somehow the negotiators at Versailles have been undermined, or they have acted out of weakness, and there have been sort of traitors at home. So the way in which, I mean, obviously people like Mussolini, who makes a sort of transition from being in the Socialist Party through to being in the Squadristi, people like him probably don't believe that at all. He's an arch cynic. But there are young men in the black shirts movements that do, and they absolutely see their enemies, the traitors, who have thought about their own interests long before they considered that of the nation. And this sort of this kind of romantic notion of the nation. These are treasonable people. Now, Italian fascism before 1937, when 38, when Mussolini starts to sort of curry favour with Hitler, doesn't really significantly feature anti-Semitism at all. Of course, there are anti-Semites amongst the Italian black shirt movement, but there are anti-Semites amongst the British upper classes. There are, the point is that the kind of hierarchy, the taxonomy of race that is in Mein Kampf, you don't really find that in Italian fascism. You find it far more so, interestingly, in Spanish fascism of the 1920s and 30s, and Spanish fascist discourse and sort of proto-fascist discourse, even though there are Jews in Italy, but there really aren't any in Spain. They all were turfed out in the 15th century. But the kind of the conspiracy theory thinking of the Spanish far right, that kind of there's some sort of ongoing international Jewish conspiracy, is really quite pronounced and embedded. So obviously, the the demographics of particular fascist movements are socially determined, historically determined, and they're the product of the events that shape that country. They're the rationale and the reasoning behind joining a street fighting force designed to bring a fascist regime to power varies, and it's hard to generalize, but certainly um, resentment and anger and trauma and a desire to restore some kind of lost status seems to be key in all of it, and the desire to find and punish internal enemies and to fight and struggle. The idea, I mean, again, this is a deeply fascist idea that the world is struggle, nature is struggle, the to establish your race is struggle, to establish yourself as the dominant force in society is struggle, and everything must be fought for. There is simply no other way. And fascism has this own internal kind of irrational dynamism that everything is a battle and everything must be fought, and there is constant ongoing radicalization. If fascism sits still, it stops kind of being fascism. It stops being this kind of promise of transformation. Of course, fascism doesn't really transform anything at all. It is designed specifically to prevent social revolutions from happening. What it always does is create new tiers of oppressive class rule, and there are depending on who you believe, either capitalist elites behind fascism that egg it on as it's a useful thing to bash the workers with and keep them down, or there are those capitalist elites that find happy accommodation with fascism. And you find that if you look at the elite groups in America now, you see both of those forces. Those that um, go to the White House to pay fealty and offer tribute to Emperor Trump, and those who are key participants in creating a new social and political order which will serve their class interests. So, what about young men who join ICE? Well, the thing is that the Trump regime differs from the Nazis. It differs from the Italian fascists in that it comes to power. Both, Hitler is appointed chancellor by Hindenburg based on kind of his electoral successes, and Mussolini is invited to be prime minister by the king based on the March on Rome and the wider strength of the fascist movement, and the fact that the king would vastly prefer a fascist prime minister than a socialist one.
Confronting high credit card debt can feel scary. But the good news is, if you owe $10,000 or more in credit card debt, financial relief options are now available. National Debt Relief is currently offering debt relief designed to reduce what you owe, fast-tracking your way to being debt-free. If you qualify for debt relief, you may be able to pay back significantly less than what you owe and save thousands of dollars. Imagine only paying one low monthly program payment you can afford and saving money as you become debt-free. National Debt Relief has already helped bring debt relief to over 550,000 U.S. consumers, earning thousands of five-star reviews and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. You're stronger than your credit card debt. Take the first step and visit nationaldebtrelief.com to see what debt relief you qualify for. That's nationaldebtrelief.com.
Trump's seizure of power, the series of mini constitutional coups that he's perpetrated since 2016, which very few of them have been unrolled by Biden, have created a not identical circumstances, but not dissimilar ones either. he hasn't so much overthrown the state as unpicked it in much the way that the Nazis did. Bit by bit, the Nazis from throughout 1933 mainly unpick all the aspects of the Weimar Constitution that provide limitations to state power and limitations to the power of state actors, particularly the Brownshirts. Those young men who now are joining ICE are being joined as kind of mass agent provocateurs. So the purpose, and this is the purpose I think that is emerging of ICE, is to create the circumstances not for ICE to work as a brown shirt or a black shirt organization in its own right, but to create the circumstances whereby the Insurrection Act can be passed and essentially nationwide martial law and the postponement of elections indefinitely can happen. And the guys who are in ICE have been where this huge increase in ICE agents. Very often, what they're not actually doing is policing immigration. They're not. They are shooting people in the streets. They are harassing people. When you look at the training that some of them have been given, it's like a few hours in some cases. They know they've got impunity. They're being given huge amounts of money, $50,000 signing bonuses and massive annual salaries. And they're sent out on the streets to escalate and provoke, to cause crisis, to cause violence, to wind things up as much as they can do, with the knowledge that they've got impunity. I suspect Trump's going to flip on that very soon. He's already making noises about the latest atrocity in Minnesota. And I think there's going to be some very, very stupid guys left twisting in the wind by the original grifter and facing decades in prison eventually. Here's hoping. So their purpose is slightly different, but they're being recruited from a similar demographic of the people who either are experiencing loss of status or fearing imminent loss of status. And a lot of the kind of the sort of recrudescence of extreme white nationalist racism in America is about the imminent fear of loss of status, the fear that the wages of whiteness, as W.E.B. Du Bois would have argued, that they're about to be lost, that whiteness is going to become, and white privilege is going to be downgraded, and that the white working classes and the brown working classes are going to essentially have the same position in society, and this is intolerable. At least if you're poor, you can claim whiteness and the legal and the practical and legal benefits that comes with it as your kind of your advantage. So there is that fear. They are recruiting people from NASCAR rallies. They're recruiting people from gun clubs. They're recruiting people at gun shows. So it's a particular part of working class white America that they're looking for, and they are creating the conditions. And this is all quite deliberate and thought through by Miller. Creating the conditions where violence becomes more and more likely, and indeed deadly violence. And the violence, that the murder of Renée Good, I think was particularly telling when the ICE officer called him like an effing bitch afterwards, to show that here is a guy who has been politely challenged by a woman and cannot tolerate it. And there is a deep misogyny that runs through that of an anger and resentment again at the idea of perceived loss of status. That here is a guy who probably has a whole range of different views, none of them particularly nice, on the status that a man should have in society compared to a woman. So that belief, I mean, the thing is it's a lot of this is illusory and a lot of it is fictional. That um, the the guys who are being fed this diet of resentment, which is again part of how fascism functions, are there to restore their own particular version of justice on the streets, which is in their eyes, a justice all of their very own, which is the restoration of status, and it's done violently. And this is how this violence is being harnessed. I mean, what that says now about the prospects for American democracy is pretty terrifying. That this is a force that has been identified, channeled, captured, and let off the leash. There will probably be backtracking by Trump, but I suspect that there will be people in Trump's administration that view ICE as being far too useful and far too handy to dismantle. There are even Democrats who are now saying, well, let's not get rid of it completely. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Instead, let's kind of reform and retrain. But ICE can be very handy. And it will be the bedrock, just as the Ku Klux Klan was, it will be the bedrock of 21st century American fascism. And that is why it needs to be, from root and branch, destroyed. Okay, so I'm going to leave you there. I'll have some more thoughts on fascism later in the week, no doubt. I always do. If you want to catch this podcast without ad breaks, then hop on over to Patreon, join us there, and I'll be posting the masterclass in the next day or two. And come and join us for the next one. Come and join us for America. We'll be doing 1945 to 74, taking in civil rights, Nixon, and a few other things besides. Take good care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Did you know 39% of teen drivers admit to texting while driving? Even scarier, those who text are more likely to speed and run red lights. Shockingly, 94% know it's dangerous but do it anyway. As a parent, you can't always be in the car, but you can stay connected to their safety with Greenlight Infinity's driving reports. Monitor their driving habits, see if they're using their phone, speeding, and more. These reports provide real data for meaningful conversations about safety. Plus, with weekly updates, you can track their progress over time. Help keep your teens safe. Sign up for Greenlight Infinity at greenlight.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.